$35 trillion. It's a number so large, your brain literally refuses to process it. If you tried to count to 35 trillion 1 second at a time, it would take you over 1,000,000 years. You'd be dead, your kids would be dead, the sun would probably burn out before you finished. But here's the thing, I stopped worrying about that number a long time ago. The data confirms something most people are too scared to admit. The US government has zero intention of ever paying this back. None. Not a single cent. Actually, it's deeper than that. In 2026, the debt isn't a bill, it's the fuel. Most people think we're drowning in it, but the reality is we're breathing it. I used to be the guy who told everyone to save their pennies. I stayed out of debt. I paid my credit cards in full. I felt morally superior to the system. I thought I was winning because I was responsible. Then, I watched the 2025 shadow bailouts. I watched as the government treated my life savings like a polite suggestion and their own debt like a divine mandate. I realized the game wasn't broken. The game is the debt. If you keep playing by the 1950s rules of saving for a rainy day, you're gonna get wiped out. This isn't a rainy day. It's a fundamental shift in the physics of money. Over the next 23 minutes, I'm gonna show you the battle map. We're gonna look at the infinity printing press, the specific enemy that is rewriting your bank account while you sleep, and exactly why the math finally broke in 2026. If you don't understand how to position yourself now, you're just the one paying for the oxygen.
Observe your grandfather's economy. It was simple. You worked a job, you produced a thing, maybe a chair or a car. You got paid in a currency that represented that thing. If the government wanted to spend money, they had to tax you or borrow it from someone who actually had it. The pattern is clear. Money was a certificate of work. But that world ended a long time ago. We just didn't get the memo until recently. Welcome to the era of hyper-financialization. In this version of reality, common sense is actually your biggest liability. Think about it. If you owe a bank $100,000, you have a problem. You're stressed, you're working overtime, you're clutching a piggy bank. But if you owe the bank $100 million, the bank has a problem. They'll do anything to keep you alive. They'll give you better rates. They'll extend your deadlines. Now, imagine you're the US government and you owe $35 trillion. At that level, the debt is no longer a liability. It is a superpower. It gives you the ability to dictate the terms of reality itself. History proves that when a system reaches this much fiscal dominance, the old rules of supply and demand just stop working. We saw it in 2025, when the interest payments on the debt finally surpassed the entire defense budget. Everyone expected a collapse. The experts on the news were screaming about a crash. They were telling you to sell everything and hide in a bunker. But what actually happened, the government just printed the interest. They didn't even hide it. They called it Liquidity Provision. Here's the thing. You cannot apply household logic to a sovereign ledger. You think in terms of, can I afford this? They think in terms of, how much more can we expand the simulation before it glitches? If you're still waiting for the big reset where everything goes back to normal, you're waiting for a train that left the station in 1971. 2026 is the year we finally realize the glitch is the new feature. Meet your new landlord. I call it the ledger. It's not a person. It's not even a political party. It's a sentient, mathematical monster that lives in the computers of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. The ledger has one job: to make sure the house never loses. And right now, the house is $35 trillion in the hole. Every time you work an hour of overtime, the ledger is watching. Every time you save $1, the ledger is calculating. You see, the ledger knows that it can never pay you back in real value, so it does something much more sinister. It rewrites the definition of the dollar while it's still in your pocket. Realize this. Inflation isn't an accident. It's not because gas got expensive or eggs are scarce. Those are just the symptoms. The data confirms that inflation is the ledger's only way out. It's a soft default. If they owe you $1 trillion today, that's a lot of value. But if they wait 30 years and make sure a loaf of bread costs $1 million, then that $1 trillion debt is suddenly very easy to pay back. It's the price of a ham sandwich. The ledger is stealing your time. That's the trap. You're trading the limited hours of your life for a currency that is programmed to lose. You feel it, don't you? That constant, low-grade anxiety. The feeling that you're doing everything right. You got the degree, you got the job, you're investing, and yet the goalposts for a middle-class life keep moving 10 yards further back every single year. That's not a coincidence. That is the physical stress of being on the wrong side of the ledger. The specific enemy isn't the rich. The enemy is the infinity printing press that ensures the debt never actually has to be settled with real work. They profit from your responsibility. As long as you keep believing the dollar is a store of value, they can keep using it as a tool of extraction.
Let's talk about financial physics. Imagine the economy is a plane, and Alex, that's me, is skydiving. Falling is great at first. It feels like flying. That's the debt boom. When the government prints money, everyone feels rich. Stocks go up, crypto goes up, your house value goes up. But I have a problem. I'm wearing a parachute, but it's not made of silk. It's made of lead weights, labeled national debt. This is the weighted parachute. Most people think that if the debt gets too heavy, you should just cut the strings, get rid of the debt, balance the budget. But here's the terrifying truth of 2026. If I cut those strings to be free of the weight, there's no canopy left to catch me. In our current system, the weight, the debt, and the canopy, the money supply, are the exact same thing. If the US government actually paid off the debt, every dollar in existence would vanish. The parachute would disappear. So, we're stuck. We have to choose between two types of disaster. Type A, we keep the parachute. It's heavy. It's pulling us down faster and faster toward the ground. That's inflation. We're falling at 200 miles per hour, but hey, at least we're still flying. Type B, we cut the strings. We stop the debt. We have a balanced budget. And we immediately slam into the ground at terminal velocity because the entire monetary system just ceased to exist. This is the sovereign debt trap. The goal of the system isn't to land the plane. The goal is to keep the plane in the air just long enough for the current pilots to retire. Observe the interest payments. In 2026, we've hit the debt eclipse. This is the moment where the interest on the debt is growing faster than the entire economy. When that happens, the weight of the parachute starts to exceed the lift of the canopy. You can't out-earn the debt anymore. No amount of GDP growth can keep up with the compounding interest on $35 trillion. So, what does the ledger do? It adds more weights to the parachute to try and create more drag. It prints more money to pay the interest on the money it already printed. It's a feedback loop, a cycle of an infinite debt. Here is the aha moment I want you to have. If the system cannot survive without the debt, then the system will never pay the debt. Once you realize the parachute is designed to fail, you stop trying to fix the parachute. You start looking for a different way to land. Let's look at a real-world example of how this ledger logic works when the stakes are high. Meet Bob. Bob ran a massive real estate investment trust, a REIT, in 2024. He owned thousands of apartment buildings. He was the king of debt. Bob followed the old rules. He borrowed billions when rates were low, but then the math changed. The 2026 debt eclipse hit. Interest rates stayed high to fight inflation, and suddenly, Bob's safe investments were underwater. He owed more in interest than he was collecting in rent. In a normal world, the one they taught you about in Economics 101, Bob would go bankrupt. He'd lose his buildings. The market would clear and prices would drop so you could finally afford a house. But Bob isn't a normal guy. Bob is systemically important. The ledger looked at Bob and realized if Bob fails, the 5 biggest banks fail. And if the banks fail, the parachute strings snap. So, did the government let Bob crash? The data confirms they did the opposite. They performed a shadow bailout. They didn't give Bob a check. That would look bad on the news. Instead, they created a special purpose vehicle. They allowed Bob to trade his bad debt for new government-backed credits. Bob didn't have to sell a single building. The prices of those apartments stayed at all-time highs. But wait, where did the money for that bailout come from? It came from the weight of the parachute. It came from the purchasing power of your paycheck. This is the 2026 asset pivot. By saving Bob, the ledger intentionally devalued the currency. Bob stayed rich, the banks stayed stable, and the 25-year-old trying to buy their first home just saw the price go up another 15% because the market was never allowed to crash. This story is the ghost economy in action. We are living in a world where the house, the big players, is protected by the ledger, while the players, you, are the ones forced to pay for the insurance. Observe the pattern. The debt isn't just a number, it's a tool used to pick winners and losers without ever having to pass a law. When you hear the US debt is a problem, understand that it's only a problem for the people who don't have their assets protected by the ledger. For Bob, the debt is his best friend. It's his get-out-of-jail-free card. Now, I have to tell you something you aren't going to like. 99% of the people watching this video are still going to lose. I know, you've watched 16 minutes of this, you feel informed, you think that because you understand the system, you're safe. But here's the ugly truth. Understanding the trap doesn't get you out of the trap. Most of you are going to take this information and do absolutely nothing. You're going to go back to your safe 401k that is 60% exposed to the very banks the ledger is cannibalizing. You're going to keep your emergency fund in a currency that loses 10% of its real-world value every single year. You're going to wait for a better time to act. The ledger loves people like you. It loves intellectuals who watch documentaries but keep their capital in the system. History proves that in a debt loop, the middle ground is the most dangerous place to be. You're not big enough to be bailed out like Bob the banker, and you're not broke enough to be subsidized by the government. You're the engine, and the engine is what gets consumed to keep the plane flying. If you want to survive 2026, you have to be willing to be wrong in the eyes of everyone you know. You have to admit that saving money is now a form of gambling. You are gambling that the ledger will suddenly decide to be honest for the first time in 50 years. Do you like those odds? I don't. That's why I stopped being a saver. The ugly side of the solution is that it requires you to give up the feeling of security. It requires you to move your wealth into things that the ledger can't easily rewrite, things that are hard, finite, or productive. And that's scary. It's much easier to just keep checking the balance on your Chase app and hoping for the best. But hope is not a strategy. It's just a slow-motion surrender. Look, if you're feeling a little bit of tactical nihilism right now, that's actually a good sign. It means you're finally seeing the walls of the maze, and you can't escape a maze until you admit you're in one. I want to de-shame you for a second. It's not your fault that the math broke. You didn't print $35 trillion. You didn't create the debt eclipse. You're just a player who was given a rulebook from 1985 and told to play in a 2026 simulation. The stress you feel, that engine heat, it's not a sign of failure. It's a sign of intelligence. Your brain is literally telling you that the numbers don't add up anymore. Now that you see the system, it can no longer control you in the same way. The ledger depends on your blind participation. It needs you to be confused. It needs you to think the debt clock is just a scary number on a screen that doesn't affect your grocery bill. But the moment you say, I see what you're doing and I'm not playing that game anymore, the power shifts. You're moving from panic to precision. In the next 3 minutes, I'm going to give you the master blueprint, not to fix the world, I'm not a politician, but to fix your position within it. We're going to talk about the 3 weapons you can use to protect your time and your family from the infinity printing press. The parachute is still falling, the weights are still heavy, but for the first time, you're the one holding the altimeter. Here are your 3 weapons. Weapon 1, the mental shift. Stop thinking in dollars and start thinking in hours. If the ledger can print infinite dollars, but nobody can print more Alex hours, then your time is the only true currency. Stop trading your limited hours for unlimited paper. If you have excess cash, move it into assets that have a fixed supply. Weapon 2, the immediate pivot. Adopt the hard asset standard. I'm not telling you what to buy. I'm telling you to observe the exit. Look for things that the ledger cannot Control-P into existence. If a bureaucrat can't create more of it with a keystroke, it's a potential life raft. In 2026, the safest thing you can do is own things that are hard to produce. Weapon 3, the systemic defense. Become systemically independent. The people who get crushed the hardest are the ones who rely 100% on the system for their income, their food, and their retirement. Diversify your dependency. Have a skill that works even if the ledger glitches. Build a network of people who trade in value, not just currency. Here is the checkmate question. If the world's most powerful nation treats its own debt like a high score instead of a liability, why are you still playing the game by the old rules? The house is gambling with your future. Isn't it time you stopped being the chips and started being the player? I want to know, what was the moment you realized the math was broken? Tell me your story below. I read as many as I can. The journey we've taken today isn't just about finance, it's about truth. If I had to summarize everything we've talked about into one single thought, it's this. In an era of infinite debt, the only true wealth is your ability to remain tethered to reality. Your future self is waiting for you at the end of this debt loop. Whether that version of you is crushed or capable depends entirely on the decisions you make while the infinity press is still humming. Don't do it for the numbers on a screen. Do it for the legacy of your time. Because once your time is gone, even $35 trillion can't buy it back. But even as you master the ledger, there is something else moving in the shadows. You've learned how the money is fake, but have you ever wondered who actually owns the real world while we're all distracted by the debt?
Next time, we pull back the curtain on the one silent force that destroys even those who follow all the rules. A force that owns your house, your data, and your future without ever spending a single dollar of their own. But that's a story for another day. Stay tactical. I'll see you in the next one.